recording was made by Mr. Ingwald Thompson, Mr. Andrew Thompson, and their sister, Mrs. Ida Christensen, April 10th, 1960, at the home of Mr. Andrew Thompson. They were interviewed by Jenny Woodward. Who were your parents?
Well, it's Mrs. Chris Thompson, but what do you call it in English?
Well, that's all right. Mr. and Mrs. Chris Thompson were your parents.
Yes.
And where were they born?
They were born in Norway.
Do you know the year they were born?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, but when did they come to the United States?
1870, that would be.
How long were they coming over here? How long did it take them?
It took them 9 weeks on the boat.
9 weeks.
Yeah.
And do you know why they came to this country?
Well, they came here to get a home. There was no chance in Norway to farm it, and my father was a kind of a carpenter. He built log houses at that time in Norway. He did that here too. And they first came, they settled. Well, they stayed the first summer, to Ed Knudsen's dad, Ellie Knudsen, in the township of Mount Morris. She was a sister of my mother, his wife. And Tom Nelson, he was there 6 years before, so he was up on the place where Andrew Nelson lived. And he worked in the woods in the winter time, and that's where he met his wife at Russell. They called it, I had a different name for it that time. And he married her. So she came down and lived on this place up here, where Andrew Nelson was born. And then my father, down there, when he stayed there that summer, then he bought a 40 of land where Harlan lived, where the buildings are at that time.
That's where your folks lived, where Harlan lived?
Yeah.
Was it that house, or did they have an old log house?
They had a wooden house.
Log house.
On the first place, they had a lumber, but that burned down. And they had a log house on the Knudsen place that they took apart and moved it up there and put it together. And that's what they lived in, on that 140.
And that was near the, what's known as the Willow Grove School.
Yes. Yes.
How many children were there in the family?
Well, my oldest brother and sister, they were born in Norway. Tom Thompson and Mary Ludlow. And there was 6 born in this country. Well, there was 7, but one boy died when he was about 6 weeks old. And then there were 6 boys living and 2 girls at that time.
Can you tell us something about your childhood?
Well, yes. Well, I was about 6 years old. There was a schoolhouse at that time right west of the old Nelson Peace's place. Oh, just about 80 rods from where we lived. And 75 years ago, the cyclone went through there and it took the schoolhouse at old Nelson's Peace and all the buildings. Just swept them right off. And then they built the schoolhouse that is now the Willow Grove. That's, I suppose it's 75 years ago. Yeah.
I've heard my folks tell about the cyclone that went through there. Heard them tell it lots of times.
Well, I can show you the place today where old John Woodard started before the township was surveyed by the state. I can show you the place today.
Yes, my grandfather, it was farther west there, near the ponds, that he settled.
Well, I think I can show you. They had a cellar under the house, but there was no stone wall. It's just a hole. And it's them sag there yet, why old John would have started. They just squatted on that.
And then I guess it was the wrong land. Somehow they couldn't get a title to it, and they had to move to another spot.
Yeah.
Not far from there, but they were just on the wrong land.
Yeah.
Can you tell about the ways of living then? Did you have any? Did they have any cattle or horses?
Yes, my father had a yoke of oxen. He had 2 cows. And he had a couple of pigs, too. And maybe a dozen chickens at that time. And my father worked in the woods 18 winters so they could live. 18 winters. And the first, he got $14 a month at his board. But it kept on going up. Toward the last, he got on 30. Towards the last of the 18 years, he got up. They raised it a little right off. He worked up here for Stevens Point, just north of Stevens Point, at that time.
You'll have to tell about the Indians living up in the woods there, and they ate up Mother's haystack.
Yeah. Well, while my father was in the woods in the winter time, there was a big flock of Indians that lived right under the hill there of Alfred Athens, what you used to call the old peace place. They lived there. And they had 9 or 10 Indian ponies. And my father had a little stack of straw, a little stack of corn stalks, and I know he had in the hay to feed his cows and oxen till spring. But these ponies, they all had bells on, and they was over there every night, eating this corn stalk. And my mother would get up and chase them away, but they come back. Oh, they bothered already. And the Indian women, they came over there and was begging pretty all the time, pretty every week. They begged for something. And my mother was afraid of them, so she gave them, if she had it, they got what they asked for. Well, so that's spring. Well, then the next summer, something happened. They moved farther west. I think they went to Minnesota, that tribe of Indians. There was a whole bunch went there. And we got rid of them. That's the last we see of them. That is such a big bunch. Once in a while a few that go through, but not many. They didn't stay.
Did they do much farming then?
Well, before my father came, they were farming then too. Oh, where Alfred Addo lives, there's a fellow from Baltimore that had that. He had 420 acres of land there. He bought from the government from Baltimore. And he had it. He built up a house there, broke up a lot of land.
His name was John Gordon, wasn't it?
No, before that.
No,
before that? Wheeler.
Wheeler.
That's right. Wheeler.
Now this Wheeler, he built up a house, the same house that's there now. But it was on a different place. It was farther west, right in the valley there. But the water boiled so much that they couldn't keep it there. We had to move it up here on the high place where it is now.
Were those ponds real high then?
Yes, they were high.
I suppose they all ran together like a lake.
Yeah, well,
Sometimes it
they
is.
went over the road, they cut the road to pieces where it is now. Right under the hill there, at that time, there was a big fountain. Run all the time. It just made a river. A kind of a small creek. All the way down. Until it filled up, then you went across the road. So we finally had to make a ditch or a bridge to run to the road.
You know, I can't remember that fountain.
Huh?
I can't remember that fountain.
No, you can't. I can. And on that Gordon place, where out at the west today, they moved the house from where it stood over there on the foundation where it stands now. And the fellow that moved it was name was Gardner Moldenhauer, Will Moldenhauer's dad. And I remember my father, he helped them. They had a kind of a, well, kind of a bomb like up here, big iron outfit, and they had a rope around it. And my father's job was, he sat under here, took up the slack. He had one horse
On a sweep.
on a sweep, like a horsepower.
Yeah.
That's done the pulling of the building. And they got it up there. Well, they got up there in good shape, clean up to the wall. But they had an awful time to get it over on that. There's a two upright. And over there. Well, they had logs and they had everything you could think of. Prop it up so that it slides across. The cellar was made beforehand, the basement. And, well, they finally got it there. It took them, just a couple of 3 weeks, but they made it anyway. So they got the house where they wanted it. It was up on the high, and it was away from that valley where the water runs so much. So the house is on the same place today.
How long can you talk?
As they put it that time. And it's about the same. They've built an addition to it since that on the west. That wasn't there that time. But the two uprights, they were there. The two of them.
Did they used to thrash with horsepower?
Why,
When you
sure.
can remember when they did.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I can
Well-
remember that.
How many teams did they use?
They used 10.
10?
I mean, 5.
5.
10 horses.
10 horses.
Yeah. Well, the first, I remember, before they had the thrash machine, they thrashed with oxen. They put the grain on a platform and had the oxen walk on it. To thrash the grain. And then they pick out what they didn't thrash. By hand.
Did they call that wasn't a treadmill, was it?
No.
A treadmill is something different.
Yeah, that's
Treadmill, I suppose that is where they grind the grain. Grind it.
No.
Isn't it? Treadmill? Well, I don't know.
No, that tread power, that was they had a rig it up here where they had they used to use a big buck for that. That would keep on going. That would run the machine over there. Yeah. To thrash, grind, and whatever they wanted done.
Well, maybe you'd like to tell about the schools, Mrs. Christensen.
Well, nothing else but just the teachers. If you want me to
You
say
went
the
to the Willow Grove School there then,
Yes,
and that's where you went to school.
Yes, that's the only school that I really went to was down in the hollow there.
How many scholars did they usually have?
Well, I should imagine about 40, shouldn't you, Anna?
They had up
40,
to
50?
They had up to 62, and then they had to build an addition to the schoolhouse about 56 years ago. 58 years ago. They had to build an addition that time. The fellow from Wauchoba done the carpenter work. he moved it to my father's place.
Who were some of the teachers?
Well, it was Francis Mosier Yates and Johnny Walla, Rose Sweat, Nellie Lane, Clara Woodard, Emma Jean Staples, Ursula Pierce, Marion Davies, Miss Smith, Mary Thomas, and Maud Selsing Thomas, and Charles Taylor was the superintendent at that time.
Well,
So,
Did they have some big boys that
yes,
usually were hard to manage?
yes, I should say so. I remember
Who
one.
were some of the big boys?
Well, I remember there was a Clara, that Smith girl from Plainfield was teaching, and the big boys got so bad that she had to go up to Henry Woodard's and get him to come down and do something about it. I know it was Louis Hansel,
well,
and who were the others? I don't know.
you're way behind.
Yeah, I suppose I am.
Well, I can remember lots before that.
Yes. Yeah.
Now,
Well, anyway, that was,
the first teacher I remember was John L. Evans. John L. Evans. He lived up here, and he taught in the schoolhouse before it blew away, before the cyclone. He was teaching there just before that. The cyclone went through and the schoolhouse was empty. There wasn't any school at that time. So nobody got hurt. They just picked the school up right up. And they had a big stove, one of them old-fashioned log ones, and it dropped that over on right north of Harlan's house. They called it the Dodge Hill. That dropped there. Old Mrs. Peace, it happened about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And it got so dark that, why, just as black as a boat. And we all run in the cellar to my father's place. There was no wall, but there was a hole under that. Well, we was under there. Oh, it rained, something pierced. Oh, it rained, just poured up. And while we were in there, old Mrs. Peace, she came run right down the cellar of the water, all wet. But she couldn't talk. She was scared to death. Well, after she calmed to so she could talk, she told about what had happened. Old Nelson Peace was in the corn crib, and he was giving some soft soap that she had in the barrel. And while he was dipping the soap out, and Mrs. Peace opened the door, and she hung on to the nut, and she hollered to the nut, "Come on in, there's a storm coming." And she hadn't more than said it, for it was there. And he picked the house up, hauled it around, and she hung on to the nut, and she dropped in an apple tree. Oh, about 10 rods from that. She dropped in the apple, she scratched her face a little bit, that's all she got hurt. And the building went.
and didn't old man Peace go head first in the soap barrel?
No.
Oh, he
But,
didn't. I thought he did.
He just took the corn crib and left the foundation. It left the foundation. And then it smashed the barrel right down, and he got all soap laying on the ground. But it didn't pick him up. He didn't get it. He laid there. But Mrs. Peace, she went with the building. And it went across where Raymond Nelson lived. There was a Jefferson lived there at that time. And they had a kind of an upright, kind of 2-story, 12 foot high, and a shanty on the north side. The cyclone took the shanty right off and left the rest of the building. It went right over like Smith Place, right over the house there. It went up in the air and dropped over Saskville. That was the last of it. It went up over that Sadlone Hill, we called it, and it dropped over Saskville, and that was the end of the cyclone. It started over here in Parker's Valley, about Oh, 3 miles northwest of Wautoma. That's what it started. It started from a whirlwind. You see it start from a whirlwind. And kept on picking up and getting stronger and stronger till it got, so it picked up everything. Yeah.
Did you have something more to tell about school?
Well, no, not especially. Only, no, maybe that they don't exactly want this in it.
Okay.
It's about the Lutheran Ladies' Aid.
Yes, I wanted you to tell about your churches.
Oh.
And something about your churches years ago.
Well, I can't.
Where you went to church?
Well, this is it, the most of it. If you want me to read it, I'm not
Just
very
tell
good
us
reader.
Just whatever you want to do.
Well, okay. This here and that. It's all right? Too long?
Oh, about the church?
Yeah. In the beginning, Our Lady's Aid was a part of the Holden Aid in Mount Morris. Reverend A.L. Dow was the pastor. Mrs. John Thompson was the first president of Ladies' Aid, and Mrs. Tom Lovedow was first vice president of the Ladies' Aid. Later, it was decided that members of West Holden separate from the Mount Morris Aid, as the distance to travel to meeting was too far to make it convenient for members to attend. The first congregational meeting was held at Chris Thompson's January 28, 1913. Mrs. Ole Severson, who had been doing and giving to mission work, was instrumental in continuing the work of the aid. The first regular meeting was held June 1906 at Sorensen's. Mrs. Ella Folsom was elected president. The menu at their meetings was usually bread and butter, baked beans or meat, sauce, cake, and coffee. The tables were always set until 12:20, when the cafeteria method was adopted. Some of the first members were Mrs. Sorensen, Mrs. Ole Severson, Mrs. Ella Folsom, Mrs. Sam Walla, Mrs. George Gunderson, Mrs. Andrew Lovedow, Mrs. Chris Thompson, Mrs. Tom Lovedow, Mrs. Peter Wally, Mrs. Knut Anderson, Mrs. Charlie Charlson, Mrs. Jim Gunderson. Yeah. The ladies pieced quilt blocks, made aprons, and shirts. And they had oyster suppers, ice cream socials, rag ball, and necktie socials, also box socials. The proceeds went one ice cream social at Andrew Lovedow's went to pay for Mrs. T. Songy's operation. The only record kept were recorded by the president. She wrote the names of those present, and their dues was 10 cents each. The Norwegian language was used until Reverend Helsom came in 1913. Is that all right?
Fine.
Well, the church that started in 1891.
Is that the West Holden?
West Holden Church.
Mm-hmm.
At that time. Well, they didn't build it till, after 1894. Well, they started after he preached in the schoolhouse for 2 years. They started to figure out ways of building a church somewhere. Because Tom Nelson, Andrew Nelson's dad, he had 14 miles to church. And they drove with horses. They went that, when the kids went to parochial school, they didn't come to our place the night before and stayed there on the way home the next night. It's too far to walk in one day. And then they finally got together. They had several meetings to get organized to build a church. Well, old Rolf from Montmore, of course, he was the head push. And they got together, and old man Hanson, Fred Hanson, he gave 1 acre of land to the church, free, where the church stands today. And later they bought an acre, so they've got 2 acres Where the church stands, the cemetery is on that too. And, well, it brought along. They had meetings after meetings. And then, of course, they had quite a time to gather up the money to start with, to buy the lumber. Because most all of them at that time was